I tracked my sauna usage over the last 1.5 years. In total, this is 142 entries. I then correlated this data with all the rest of my health data I have entered into Guava Health, and now let's take a look at the results. Methods. In the first couple of weeks I didn't track sauna. I then decided to track sauna with my Garmin Fenix 7 S Pro later on, first with my Fenix 6 S Pro. This has the advantage mostly that I have the timestamp, but as well my heart rate, as well as skin temperature. Now on the 6S Pro it seems to be the case that the temperature sensor in there is not skin temperature, measuring skin temperature, but is just basically measuring the temperature of the device itself, whereas on the 7S Pro it seems to be now skin temperature. So therefore I also have skin temperature, but this data of basically temperature in the sauna is not really reliable, I think, because mostly I discovered that if I basically spread my sweat over the watch, it doesn't get as hot. Otherwise it gets quite hot and would possibly quite possibly damage the watch. So especially in the sessions that have been longer, so I tried sometimes to go for 35 minutes, for 40 minutes. In my record I did a few times 45 minutes in 90 degrees Celsius. 90 degrees Celsius is 194 degrees Fahrenheit. So now I have the timestamps as well as the duration in Garmin Connect, and I took a look at this dataset and I entered it manually into Guava Health, since there is no option to import sauna data automatically or in a kind of semi-automated way via CSV. Even though I could export a CSV file from Garmin Connect, I cannot import it into Guava Health. So now let's go into Guava Health. In Guava Health I do have the option to enter 3 different types. The first one is dry above 170 degrees Fahrenheit. The second one is wet below 150 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 65 degrees Celsius I calculated, and there is also infrared, which seems to be about 48 degrees Celsius at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. In terms of the duration, there are 3 different types. The first one is 5 to 10, the second one is 10 to 20, which I by default just let activated. I did not enter the longer sessions in this distinction, with the third distinction being 20 to 30 minutes. Mostly because I don't know yet how to basically have the distinction in there. And so what I currently only have tracked is whether I on a specific day I went to the sauna or I did not go to the sauna, or I did have 2 sauna sessions that usually in my case last at least 10 minutes. So I do have the 10 to 20 minutes activated. I do not have the 20 to 30 minutes entry for the longer sessions, because where do I put the threshold? Is it 20 seconds? So basically 20 minutes and 0 seconds. And if I then have an entry which is 20 minutes and 1 second, do I already count it as 20 to 30 minutes? It would make sense, but I haven't entered it as this yet. Activity afterwards is also a option, so one can enter none, cold shower, cold bath or snow dive. And then the date and the time can be entered. I did not enter the time, as in Garmin Connect there was no table view with the time visible, so otherwise I would have to go through all of these 142 entries and manually basically enter the activity, and then I would only be able to, I assume, at least see the time. So now I entered all of this data, and let's take a look at the automatic calculations. Guava Health Correlated, not the automatic calculations, but the automatic correlations Guava Health discovered for me. So there are 11 new insights which have popped up since I started entering this data. They already started appearing once I entered maybe 10 entries, then maybe at around 45, then maybe at around 60, 80, and so on and so forth. So first of all, I have to maybe mention what is in Guava Health. So currently I do have Google Fit as well as Garmin connected to Guava Health. Guava Health is kind of a health data synthesizer, one could say. It also allows you to enter blood markers, and I entered all my blood markers as of now, but there is quite a problem probably, because you could potentially also correlate the blood markers with other data, but the problem is that the blood markers are such rare entries in my case that it probably doesn't make much sense to use those. So I haven't had a correlation with the blood markers, even though I have at least quite a few blood panels, or have had quite a few blood panels in the last couple of years. So the data I have entered is, first of all, Garmin Connect. I do have Garmin smartwatches now for 2 years, and previously I owned a Galaxy Fit 1, then I switched to a Galaxy Active 2, then I had a Galaxy Watch 4, and I eventually bought the Galaxy Fit 2 because otherwise when charging I would not have basically even the steps. And then recently I got the Galaxy Watch 6, which now also has skin temperature, but this is also not imported. What I do have imported now from basically these two health systems is resting heart rate, which is from Garmin, sleep, which is basically from both, so both are entered, and I think the better one is usually taken, or I don't know which one is taken. I also have steps, blood pressure, HRV, peak flow. Peak flow is manually entered. I do not have it in either Samsung Health or Garmin Connect. Temperature, weight, with also body fat, because I do have a Garmin Index S2 on which I stand on every single morning. Maybe I will mention the other data types as they pop up now in the insights. I now go through the insights, so there are 11 new. My deep sleep, as probably either used, so I could manually basically decide whether I want to use the dataset from Garmin Connect or I want to use the Galaxy dataset or the Samsung dataset, which is then synchronized to Google Fit, and Google Fit can be connected. So my deep sleep apparently went down 16% on days with sauna. My REM sleep went apparently up 21% on days with sauna. My resting heart rate went up 12% with more minoxidil. But this is a correlation that is not related to sauna. So there are two other correlations which are related to sauna. My body fat seems to be 14% higher on days with sauna, and my breathing rate seems to be 3% down on days with sauna. These are now the four correlations Guava Health automatically discovered. One could also now track correlations on one's own. So if one would have a suspicion that something is correlated, then one could enter those two markers and then see whether there is a correlation. Now, it would probably also be useful to have the timestamp in there to maybe allow different correlations, but mostly the correlation feature works like this. So one does enter basically a factor, and then how does X affect Y, and then one can enter on a weekly basis, the night before, or on a monthly basis. With these correlations that are automatically calculated, the time duration, or basically the time interval between those two factors or those two variables, is automatically chosen, which I think is somewhat useful, because otherwise I would have to think about all of these things. Is the deep sleep that happens actually on the same date, or is it after, or what happens if I basically go all night long without sleeping and then it's the next day? And so this is automatically chosen, which in terms of choice architecture I think is somewhat useful for me, because otherwise I would have to make very many decisions to arrive at a conclusion like this. Now then the correlation, so basically there are two data sets. So first of all, there is one data set, and as I understand it, Guava Health then decides usually on a automatic threshold. So one could say in terms of sauna and deep sleep, the threshold was in this case 1, mostly because I probably only had one sauna session in a day, but I don't know exactly where this threshold or how this threshold applies to this. In terms of body fat, for example, the body fat threshold seems to be, so the division threshold for body fat in my case seems to be 14.8%, which means that there are now two data sets, and now basically everything that is below 14.8 and everything that is above 14.8 is now compared. And so these two data sets are compared, and then it says on days that are higher in body fat, so 14.8 above, there is this correlation with resting heart rate, and there is on days which are lower. So basically it compares these two data sets and then says something like resting heart rate with higher body fat is 10% higher, or something like this. In terms of the p-value, it uses usually the standard 0.005. I did not have any other value in there. It seems that it always takes this. Then there is also a diagram actually calculated, which I might show maybe in a different video, in which I will also screen record. Mostly I wanted to now record my first reaction to this. So first of all, the deep sleep goes down 16%. Let's summarize these findings. Deep sleep goes down 16% with sauna, REM sleep goes up 21%, body fat goes up 14% with sauna, and breathing rate goes down 3%, which it doesn't go down. It is just a correlation. So on these days I had measured in the morning. So let's go maybe through the individual ones. Breathing rate is from Garmin. So the Garmin watch basically but tracks my breathing rate. Then why would this go down? I don't know. Maybe I sleep better. This could be a potential cause. It could also be the case that if I am doing sauna, I might do less other activity. because I'm more strained, therefore I do have a less average breathing rate because I do not have the higher breathing rate of activity. In terms of the body fat, it seems, I don't know, maybe it's also related to activity. Of course, I don't know any of these things, but what I'm doing is just guessing. In terms of REM sleep, going up 21% could be just a random correlation, but it also could be that I actually do have more REM sleep on these days. I do have more REM sleep on these days, which is in the data, but the question is why. It could be the case that in terms of the proportions of sleep given a certain duration always has, so basically the proportions seem to vary based on demand. And so what I could figure is that if the deep sleep goes down by 16%, this could be, again, related to activity. If I have a day on which I do sauna, which usually in my case was Sunday, but previously I also used different systems. So the first couple of weeks to months, I did sauna basically 10 to 20 minutes after my strength training sessions, which usually were Monday, Wednesday, as well as Friday. Now, on Sunday, I eventually decided to switch on Sunday. On Sunday, I usually have a run, which lasts maybe from 5 to 15 kilometers. And so I then did sauna in the evening. But of course, I was not as consistent as one would wish. So therefore, there are also these, basically in the background of this is also my activity level, and also related to this, my nutrition. So on days on which I do more cardiovascular exercise, my body seems to demand more carbs, whereas on days I do more resistance training, my body seems to demand more protein. So one could guess now that on days with sauna, at least basically on more days then, so that this again is related to activity, that if I have a day on which I then eventually have no strength training, because this was only in the beginning, but do have basically more cardiovascular training, which then might require a less physical activity, which might require less regeneration. And the physical regeneration seems to happen mostly, as I understand, in deep sleep. So one could guess now that on the majority of the days, because I also had sauna, I kind of replaced more activity with sauna on these days. And even though I ran, I did not do strength training. So the majority of these sauna days now could be days on which I therefore had less resistance training, and therefore my deep sleep was also lower because I had less need for physical recovery, and therefore maybe the proportions shifted from deep sleep to more REM sleep, which then is up 21%. This would be a plausible explanation, but of course I'm just guessing at this point